Hello and welcome back to World Talks, where every word matters. I'm Anna Kalczynska. Good evening. The EU needs to spend 10 times more on defense, says the bloc Defense and Space Commissioner Andrius Kubilius. What's the EU's next year budget to allocate close to 100 billion euros for defense? Politico's reports. Is that even achievable? And is the bloc in agreement on that goal? Here's to answer these questions and more is International Relations Institute Baltic State College Political and Strategic Studies from Estonia, Wierenga. Hello, sir. Good evening. Good to have you.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Exactly. So let's elaborate on that. Is the goal set by Commissioner Kubilius even achievable?
Well, it's going to be very hard to politically achieve that, but it is something that needs to be done. I mean, realistically speaking, between 5 to 8% of GDP from all NATO member states is what would be needed, especially those that are in Europe, to make sure that we can outpace the threats coming from the East. Politically, it's not so easy. We're about getting ready to hit the 10-year mark since the Wales summit, where allies pledged to spend 2% of the GDP. And we're not quite fully there yet amongst all 32 allies, but several allies have or committed to very soon spend the 2% that's necessary. I would anticipate that at the next summit, at the next NATO summit in the Netherlands this summer, that allies will say that they want 2.5% or 3%. And, you know, the EU commissioner has asked for even more, which is realistic considering the change in the security environment.
Exactly. So is this perspective of Baltic commissioner taken seriously by other partners in the EU? You said it's difficult to achieve one position on such an ambitious perspective. But is it not the voice coming from Lithuania, from the Baltic states, that just raises an alarm in the EU and should be listened to, should be followed?
Absolutely, it should be listened to. Will it be? Not sure. I think that there's a lot more negotiations going on between countries that feel more of the threat the further close to the Russia border that they are. For example, from Poland up to Finland and Sweden, you know, those are the countries that really feel that this is our neighborhood. We are facing a lot of hybrid threats. We don't know what will happen when the Trump administration comes in, what will happen with Ukraine, what will happen with Russian military reconstitution. And, you know, the further west that you go from the Polish-German border, I don't think that the seriousness is there. I mean, the calculus has changed a couple of years ago when the second phase of Russia's war of conquest and aggression against Ukraine started. But I think that there was that window of time where people didn't really want to admit that the security environment has changed, that the shift in geopolitics has changed. There was a big uncertainty coming because that came on the foothills of COVID. And of course, politicians always have to think about elections. And more defense spending means higher taxes. And it depends on which population. Certain populations, that's acceptable to a much larger degree than it is to other countries who don't necessarily face the threat on their borders. So there will be a lot of political maneuvering, and I don't think that will happen anytime soon, but I think that it should happen very soon. And I'm happy that the commissioner has said that, because that gets the conversation started.
Right. So one more quote from Andrius Kubilius: "We need to be ready for the possibility of a Russian aggression." Now, Andrius Kubilius was twice the Prime Minister of Lithuania. He's a very experienced politician. But how to change the mindset in distant countries in EU, from the south, for instance, so that they understand the real danger and the threat coming from the east?
Well, I have two options for you. One of them involves the United States, and one of them just involves EU countries. You know, all but 4 of them are now NATO member states. So I'll start in reverse order. Over in Europe, I think the conversation needs to be a constant reminder that the security environment has changed and that instability on a border of a NATO member state is a problem for all of us. I mean, you hear, 1 inch means 1 inch for the whole alliance. It's not just 1 inch of Lithuanian territory or Latvian territory or what have you. And I think that it's better to prepare for the worst, even if you think that there's not a 100% chance that that will happen. I'm a former United States Marine infantryman. We had the saying, pray for peace, prepare for war. It's not inevitable that Russia will encroach on NATO's territory, but we can't take that off the table. And I think that politicians further west of NATO's northeastern flank need to start, telling their citizens that they need to prepare for a possibility that war could expand on European soil over into a NATO or EU member state. Now, the second possibility could be with the United States. Again, with the next administration, we'll see what's happening, but communicating more with allies that do spend 2% and less with allies that don't. So that means countries like Poland, the Baltic states, for example, talking about how they can, because they have spent the money and they've prepared their militaries for this, how they can further strategically maneuver a lot of the uncertainties that aren't inevitable but are more of a possibility than I think a lot of people like to admit. NATO, of course, operates on a consensus basis, that's for sure, but I think that there might be a change in calculus on who the big heavy lifters are in Europe will be.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly. Finland and Sweden joining NATO. Do you think there's a potential for an avant-garde in Europe with the northern countries now?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, with Sweden and Finland joining, the Nordic-Baltic 8 became a solid political group. A solid military group. It was no longer strictly political. It was military and it was defense. And Sweden and Finland bring a lot to maritime security, to air security. And both of those things are crucially important, especially looking at the vulnerabilities in the Baltic Sea region. I mean, if you look at the PICNA exercise right now that's going on in Estonia, it means lightning in Estonian language. They have concentrated more on air and maritime, and previously it's been pretty heavy in terms of land-centric. And so I think with those capabilities coming into the alliance, with those two countries realizing politically that, we need to do this. I mean, I think that, a lot of people who follow geopolitics, the significance of Finland and Sweden breaking their neutrality that has spanned for decades is hugely significant. And it means that they felt that they needed the nuclear umbrella and the security guarantee that is provided with NATO membership because of Russia's behavior. So if anything, that strengthens NATO's deterrence in that sense.
All right. Now, we hear from Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, that the peace talks between Ukraine and Russia could start this winter. So, of course, it's probably too early to predict what the outcome is going to be. But what would be the threat? How do you perceive it? What would be the threat of a negotiated status quo for the Baltic states should a peace come to place?
Well, there's a couple points. I mean, it depends on what the actual peace is going to mean. Does it mean peace until Donald Trump leaves office and then the next president comes in? Or does it mean that there's some initiative or some reason that's going to keep Putin out of Ukraine? And a lot of that will depend on what's negotiated at the negotiating table. If and how much territory is ceded, for example, what the consequences that the U.S. puts on the line if Vladimir Putin disobeys or does not honor the agreement, which he's not known to honor these types of things. So I don't think that you can take him at his word. But I think one of the things that, with strategic foresight that the Baltic states need to keep in mind, Finland as well and Poland, is that if Russian troops leave Ukraine, I don't think that the Kremlin is just going to sit back and become a peaceful neighbor and say, "Oh, it didn't work here, and we're just going to lay low and try to be friendly with people." They're going to reconstitute their military, and we don't know what they're going to do next. And a lot of it depends on how NATO reacts. I don't think that right now Russia is willing to pick a fight with NATO. So I think what they will do, and this is another worry for the Baltic states, but because of their allies further west of the North northeastern flank is try and really create a discord and a dissonance in domestic politics and try to prop up pro-Kremlin candidates in elections. You see this going on in Romania, for example, and try to get as many disruptors in there so that they can finally get a point where they say, okay, we're willing to act when we feel that this amount or this percentage of national governments are weak and are not willing to respond with the force that we anticipate would happen under a united front. So I think that the domestic aspect is a key layer of importance, as is military reconstitution. And the third thing that I think is really, really crucial is who is going to win the tech race. I think right now NATO has got an edge on Russia over that, but it depends on how China competes with the United States for who's going to be an AI superpower, for example, and how that will play out in the foreign and security domains.
So many factors enters in the game. Thank you very much, Louis Wierenga, International Relations Institute, Political and Strategic Studies from Baltic State College, Estonia, was our guest. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
My pleasure. Have a good evening.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks, but please stay close as more news and features are coming.